sul braccio.
Yes. Now, if we can go and start. Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this meeting, to this event. The event is entitled Climate Justice Finance from Global Perspective to Local Solutions. Who is speaking is Alberto, Pirni, coming from the School of Advanced Studies, and I'm I'm a representative of one of the institutions that organized this event. In approaching the topic that we are going to address during this meeting, I would like first to sincerely thank the other co-applicants institutions that are here represented. I'm referring, besides the School of Advanced Studies at PISA, I'm therefore going to thank the co-applicant foundation, Fondation pour l'étude de la recherche sur le développement international, FERDI, which is here represented by Mr. Mathieu Bouchot. Thanks for coming. And the other co-applicant, the Indian Youth Climate Network, which is represented by Ashish Pawar, who is following us. Okay, going to the meeting, I would like also to mention, to express my sincere gratitude towards the people that helped in organizing this event, mainly starting from Dr. Riccardo Nicolini, which is our contact company here, and Dr. Fausto Feindouno, that together with us contributed in a very deep and wide sense of fraternity in organizing this event. Having said this, to jump immediately into the topic, in order to let's say, do a step forward, for us it's not trivial to do a step back and to come again to the documents that are already present in our folders, ideally, and also in the presentation of the same COP27 main website. Actually, if you go to the home page and click on the button number 8, matters related to finance, people can find two very important documents. One is the third report related to the fourth biannual high-level ministerial dialogue on climate finance, and the second is entitled Progress Towards Achieving the Goal of Mobilizing Jointly $100 billion per year to address the needs of developing countries. Well, by referring to this, to the first document that I mentioned, so the fourth biannual high-level ministerial dialogue on climate finance, this is a report that tried to offer an updated point of view coming from the COP26, mainly from Glasgow. And by reading this report, it's a very effective and a brief report, so I do recommend reading to anyone interested in such a kind of in the topic that we're going to address. At a certain point, meaning at the introduction, point C, we can read possible action by the Conference of the Party. And we can read the following. The COP may wish to consider this summary as an input to the long-term climate finance deliberations. May wish to consider. Let's notice, keep in your mind the expression, the linguistic expression that we use. And then, by reading the key messages that have been reported, the point 5, so the first key message is the following. Reported public finance provided and mobilized through bilateral and multilateral channels has increased to an unprecedented level, but still falls short of the amount required to meet the goal of jointly mobilizing US dollar 100 million US dollar annually for climate finance by 2020. Efforts to meet the goal need to be ramped up, transparency at the maximum, enhanced, and so on and so forth. But at the point 7, there is another take-home message very important to the present-day discussion that we are going to address. They are saying, their report is saying, finance for adaptation, particularly in the form of grants, needs to be increased. And this is one of the key points that we are going to address. So the forms of grant. Well, people are sitting beside me and linked online, so we are sort of mixed panel today, share a basic distinction. This distinction has to do with a distinction based on climate finance on the one hand and climate justice finance on the other. While climate finance indicates investments in climate mitigation and adaptation to cool, regardless of where they come from and why, so there is a kind of perspective that I would like to call external into internal, not top-down, but from somewhere into some specific context. The perspective that we would like to adopt, that we would like to share with you by starting from a course that I do hope we will embody today, will offer an argument, hopefully we will offer an argument related to climate justice finance. Climate justice finance instead indicates, in the spirit of COP15 pledge, so we are to date back our remembering, investments in climate mitigation and adaptation made, please put attention on that, by developed countries, but in developing countries, on the basis of principles of justice. This has to do with the present day debate. So, by developed countries, in developing countries. So we have to put at the center of the picture the modalities, the actors, the criteria for allocating resources. Last but not least, public consensus related to this, also public awareness, raising public awareness, but also we have to address the specific responsibilities and different typologies of actors that should be put at the center of our discussions. All these topics will be touched upon by the speakers and the co-speakers that we are here hosted, and therefore I'm really happy to give the floor first to our Jocelyn Timperley, which is linked online. And Jocelyn is a freelance climate journalist based in the UK and US now. And so, Jocelyn, the floor is yours for introducing, offering us a comprehensive overview of the entire topic we are really addressing starting right now. Please, Jocelyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me okay. It's good? Yeah.
Okay, here you go. Perhaps we can try to enlarge the picture, but please go ahead, Jocelyn.
Thanks so much. So, well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I'm, to be honest, really looking forward to all the other experts who are going to join, who are coming after me. But I just wanted to give it like a little bit of an overview from my perspective, having just reported on climate finance for quite a few years now. Obviously, like the big headline on climate finance is that the goal was missed last year, which is what was being warned for the past 5 years. It was going to be missed, and then last year we basically had confirmation it was going to be missed, and now it has been missed. So you know, that is the for me, that is the big. No, you can't hear me at all.
Yes, we can hear you, but now there are people that are arranging the volume since we are, properly speaking, not in a silent room in this moment. Not to the participants that are completely silent, but to the external movements, let's say.
Shall I just wait for a little minute?
Keep on going. Just go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Try to raise your volume also on your side. Also from your side, you can raise to the maximum your volume.
I'm not sure there's too much I can do, but perhaps if I put this closer. Yeah, so I feel like that is the big headline message really on climate finance, but there's also a lot of sub messages that we see in the data, this data from the OECD that comes out every year. So one, as Ricardo said, we're really lacking on adaptation finance. It is supposed to be ostensibly around half and half mitigation and adaptation, but currently adaptation is around a third of the finance that's given. And that's not good enough, especially because we know that climate impacts are already being felt around the world, and so we really need to ramp up that adaptation finance really fast. But alongside that, there's this huge issue of the finance basically going mainly via loans, not grants. And some NGOs such as Oxfam have really criticised that most of that climate finance shouldn't maybe even be considered to be part of the full goal. It should only count the amount that it's subsidized. We shouldn't be counting full loans. You can take different views on that, but the fact is that lots of the impacts of climate change cannot be sort of adapted to via profit-making loans. We do also need to have grants distributed for this, and then it becomes even more important for the issue of loss and damage. I think another concern with this climate finance is that it's not necessarily reaching those who are most impacted by climate. Hiya.
Sorry for interrupting again, but if you can, let's say, higher your volume up to the maximum, because here is not so good, really.
Yeah.
I don't from the YouTube and the external view, but from here is not so good. I don't know for the audience.
Thank you.
Not so good at all. So please try to.
Sorry about that. I don't know if there's much I can do. Perhaps it might be better to just go to a different speaker first, and I can maybe come back to me and see if it's working better. I can have a fiddle around.
Not really. Please try to speak closer to the microphone, please.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is any better.
Sorry about that, but we would love to listen what you're saying.
Thanks. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if this is helping at all. I'm just sort of moving the mic closer to my. No. I think maybe better to just move on.
No, unfortunately not. But now I'm asking the people in charge for technical issues for fixing this point, if we can. Just a second, Jocelyn. Okay, so people are saying that from the external perspective and the external listener, so from YouTube, the audio, just a pity that we are not so able to listen. Just it. Jocelyn, please go ahead if you can hear me.
Hi. Sorry, you just cut out there for a second. Can you hear me okay now then?
Okay. If the program are going ahead, Jocelyn, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, try to go ahead then.
Thank you. And please, if it cuts out, please feel free to move ahead without me. But I'm not sure how much of what I said that you heard, but I'll just sort of keep going with my overview. As I just tried to outline, some of the issues that have come up with climate finance. So the fact that most of it's loans, the fact that most of it's going to mitigation, and the fact that much of it is not reaching the most vulnerable countries. And I think that there is a general view that this distribution system is, if not broken, definitely needs a lot of work to make it more just, or if this money is actually being distributed to be for climate justice, then we need to change the way it's being distributed. On top of this, and I think we're going to hear more about this after, there's this emerging issue, or this emerging kind of science of fair share contribution. So the goal of climate finance was politically, savvily made as a collective goal. It wasn't nothing was aligned for different countries having to contribute a certain amount. The idea was that countries all came together and to collectively reach this goal. But now it's been missed. These conversations of who should be paying what have increasingly risen, and most of the analysis show that if you look at all the analysis show that if you look at a fair share distribution based on historical emissions or even current emissions, then the US is the one that is definitely falling short. And other countries which are not falling short are often the countries such as Japan that deliver most of their finance in loans, not in grants. So there's this kind of balance of countries kind of meeting it, but providing most in loans, and then some of the countries which provide more grants, like the UK, are also falling short. Last year, one of the big outcomes of the COP last year was this promise to double adaptation finance by 2025, and that's a great goal, but we need to see progress on the ground about that. But if that is met, that would be fantastic, I think. And then, in addition to that, there is now official discussions being made on a new goal for the post-2025 period. So all of this is coming together at the same time as we have these rising debates around loss and damage, and loss and damage has finally made it, I think, into the more mainstream area of the talks. It seems to me last year and this year it has really become, not that it wasn't an issue that was being very much pushed before, but now it's become part of the mainstream and really part of the conversation. So I think with that, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I think I'm just going to close there anyway and pass on to the next person so I don't take up too much time. So thank you very much.
Thanks indeed, Jocelyn, and also please apologize for this the technical inconvenience, but at the very end we succeeded in having you here in some way. Okay, let's move on then, and let's try to enlarge our view, our picture by let's say posting not only a comprehensive point of view, so a point of view which starts from the global north, see it, but also what is going to happen in the global south. So we are going to host the point of view of an internal observer, a privileged internal observer, if I may, and this is the turn of the second speaker, Mahamoudou Savadogo, which is Environment and Climate Change Expert at the Permanent Secretariat of Non-Governmental Organization based in Burkina Faso. Thanks, Mahamoudou, for being here, and thanks for contributing to the large adaptation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. First of all, I would like to mention that I'm from Burkina Faso, a French language country, but for the circumstance, I'm obliged to express myself in English in order maybe to make myself understand. Then I would like also to thank you for having associated our country for this important event in order to talk about climate justice or if you want climate financing. Then to address this question, I would like to focus my speech on three main points. First of all, I would like to speak about the financing of adaptation in Africa. As you know, we can't speak about financing, climate financing, without speaking about the financing of adaptation. And you can remind yourself that in 2009, a big target was set in order to mobilize about 100 billion in order to support adaptation in developing countries. But at the day of today, if you make the situation, I think that it's not very, very comfortable like this. The financing of adaptation lags behind the financing of mitigation, and is amount 25%, and I can say that we must throw some efforts in order to go to these goals. I would like also to make some statistics about the adaptation need. If you take the last report, according to the adaptation gaps report, the adaptation need range between 115 and 315 billion. And if you take only the specific case of my country, Burkina Faso, you can know that our national adaptation plan cost is amount 4,000 billion of French CFA. Then it's very encouraging, and I'm asking myself, where are we going to find this amount in order, these resources in order to finance our adaptation? The second point of my intervention is about the distribution of resources between the central government and the local government. And we know that some countries, we have a different step of governance, and in my country we have the central government and the local collectivity. And let me know you that at the 10% of funds raised to the local level. And I think it's not enough. We have to make some advocacy in order to improve, in order to reach the resources in this level. And I'm going to end my speech to mention the specific point of loss and damage. When you are talking about climate change, it's necessary to take some measures in order to adapt yourself. But what I'm asking you, what arrives when adaptation are limited in some specific cases? That's why it's important for us to take some measures in order to take into account loss and damage in the negotiation about climate change. And for this point, I think it's very important to make some facility, or if you want, some fund in order to support the financing of loss and damage. And this must be like a subsidy in order to increase, to not increase the subdebt of the debt in the developing countries. And if we are giving some permission, I would like firstly to translate maybe in 1 minute for my colleagues who are here. Yeah. Donc, j'ai quand même demandé l'autorisation pour donner un peu la quintessence de mon intervention en français pour ceux qui sont venus quand même écouter nous soutenir. Donc, le sujet de ce matin quand même porte sur la justice climatique, le financement de la justice climatique. Et pour adresser cette question, nous avons éventuellement orienté notre intervention sur 3 points. Le premier point qui porte un peu sur le financement de l'adaptation. Et vous comprendrez qu'à la date d'aujourd'hui, le financement donc, de l'adaptation est à la traîne par rapport au financement donc, de l'atténuation. Et donc, pour vous donner une idée, ça coûte beaucoup donc, de 25% à 2019 et je trouve que c'est assez insuffisant. Donc, le deuxième point, c'est par rapport un peu à l'équilibre même donc, de financement entre le niveau central et puis le niveau local. Une chose est de mobiliser les ressources, et une autre aussi est de pouvoir aussi les distribuer de manière efficace, de sorte à ce que les collectivités aussi puissent en bénéficier. Et le troisième point donc de mon intervention porte bien sûr sur la prise en compte des pertes et préjudices dans les négociations. Et nous plaidons pour qu'on puisse quand même mettre en place un mécanisme pour pouvoir donc prendre en charge cette question de pertes et préjudices. Then I'm going to finish my speech with a question. Is there some person in this room who thinks like me that the financing of adaptation is okay? If there's some person, please raise your hands, please. Right, then I'm calling for a justice in this terms. Thank you very much.
Thanks indeed, Mahamoudou. Now we approach and we are trying to express an internal point of view, starting from your words, and we are also experiencing how it might work and how big are the difficulties. Let's say not giving for granted that process, and also not giving for granted, absolutely not really for granted the result, the effectivity of our pledges and the state pledges, basically. We are going then to let's say open up another concentric circle, which is now devoted again, focusing on the destination point of view, so on the recipient's point of view, but based on criteria for allocations related to funds. By trying to overcoming the basic level of just giving grants. And in order to help us to address this issue, we have the pleasure to have with us Dr. Sosso Feindouno, which is a researcher by the Fondation pour l'étude de recherche sur le développement international FERDI again, but he's also a consultant for the United Nations. So very happy to have you here, and the floor is yours. Sosso has a PPT presentation, so you're welcome to do that. Perhaps we have to share also the PPT for the external audience. Just share it.
Okay.
You have to, let's, if you can help us in sharing the PPT. In the meantime, let me say that we are trying to speeding up our intervention, our speeches, in order to save some amount of minutes in order to start discussing also with the audience and perhaps with someone who is following us online, starting also from the other speakers that are leading us in the future. The Sosso again, the president.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Alberto, for giving me the floor. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this event. The topic we are tackling today is extremely important. You know, many countries and territories are vulnerable to climate change, but at different degrees. So quantitative and qualitative instruments are needed for a fair and transparent allocation of resources between countries. So that is very important. That is why my intervention will focus on the properties that an index should have in order to be used for the allocations of resources devoted to mitigations and adaptations. That is the first part, and to that end I will try to present an example of an index that we have designed with my colleagues at FERDI. So it will be very important to show that with its properties, and maybe if time permits, we can go even further for discussions on that. So let me start. If we consider climate as a public good, it's quite obvious that international finance resources must be at the heart of the climate justice. Rich countries, in particular those of the G20, are the most contributed to the pollutions. They are accounting for 80%, example, for G20 countries, 80% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, while developing world, in particular, the poorest, contribute negligibly. If you took example, Africa countries and the small island developing state countries, these two countries are most of the time mentioned in most of the reports that we have regarding the climate change. For Africa example, the continent is contributing for about 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. If you take the example of the small island developing states, they are contributing for 1%. So these two groups of countries are severely and disproportionately impacted by the harmful effect of climate change. But at the same time, they didn't receive the finance that they need for the adaptation. Example, if you take the case of the African countries, for the recent year, on average, the continent has received 26% of climate resources. So we have some discrepancies. We have countries very impacted by the climate change harmful effect, but they didn't receive the resources that they need to receive for the adaptation. There is a discrepancy. That is why the international community needs instruments, quantitative and qualitative, to help countries to have allocation resources. To find this quite criteria that could be used for countries to allocate resources. To respect the transparency and the equity criteria for that. That is why indicators are very interesting for that. So let me present you the properties that a good index should have in order to be used for allocations of resources devoted to climate change in particular. But this criteria is also equivalent for those that people have to use to allocate resources in development in general. Example, at this moment at the United Nations, I'm working in person with the high-level panel, trying to help them, to support them, to build a multidimensional vulnerability index for the same purpose, to how to allocate resources to one of the most vulnerable countries. So, the first criteria that we have is the universality. Universality is quite important. It's important to have an index for all countries in the world, because both developed and developing countries could be candidates for the resources devoted to allocation. But it's quite important to focus on the developing countries, because these countries are mentioned in most of the reports designed by United Nations and other organizations. So that is the first one. The second one is very important. I think that is the heart of the approach. We need the separability between the structural and non-structural factors. That is a key core of the index. You don't need to put in the index that is devoted for the resource allocation. We don't need to have it to have in this indicator the non-structural factors. Just try to focus on structural factor. Why? This is very important. The first thing that what do you mean by structural indicator? By structural indicator, we need two criteria. The first one is the exogeneity. The indicators must be exogenous from current policy. The second criteria will be you don't need indicators that are volatile. Those indicators should be very stable over time. Why is this? The first. Can you hear me good, sir? Sorry about that. The reason is, the first one is the moral hazard. We need to avoid moral hazard. If we put in the indicators, elements that are related to current policies, countries can build themselves their own vulnerability. It's because they can design policies that can contribute them to increase their vulnerability in order to have more resources. So, if you have to avoid the self-inflicted elements in the indicator, we don't need to put non-structural factors, the factors that are related to current policies. The second reason is, for IFAG, International Financial Institutions, and the MDB, Multilateral Development Banks, they need something that is not volatile, that helps them to make the resource allocations more predictable. As we can see, the sustainable development is the long-term, very long-term process. So it's important to have some type of predictability in allocations of resources. The third reason is, in the current allocation formula that we have, for example, at the World Bank, we have some criteria that is related to performance. If you want to avoid a double counting between the performance aspect and policy-related factors, the two aspects are very correlated. So if you have to avoid this in the indicator, you just need to keep the structural factors. So another criteria would be, the equity. If you respect these different points, we can have some guarantees regarding the equities and the transparencies in the allocation process. We need a real data, good data that can help to decisions and to allocate resources to the countries that need it. So, we have currently a lot of indicators in the market, if I have to say this, in the market, but they are not designed for the same purpose. They are not designed for. It's okay. Okay. They are not designed for the same purpose. We have a lot of indicators, but most of them are built for to raise the awareness regarding the climate change harmful effects. They try to combine a lot of indicators because they try to be in line with the IPCC framework, to have sensitivity, exposure, to have also the adaptation. But if you know these indices, most of the time people don't make the difference between sensitivity and adaptation factor, adaptivity capacity. Sometimes you can see an indicators in, for an index X, we can find policy or adaptation, adaptive capacity factors in this. And another time, for another index, we can find, the same type of indicators in that cluster. So that creates some discrepancies in the indicator. That's why at the end, it's difficult to have something that is consistent, because the indicators that have included in the composite index are not the same. So the consequence, the direct consequence of this is at the end, you cannot compare the vulnerability of countries between them, because the results differ from one index to another. And as we see, if you have for adaptive capacity, we use most of the time socioeconomic data, and we know that researchers know, people know that for this kind of data, this kind of data is very patchy, and it's not easy to find the good data. Most of them are related to household data, and these are not quite good in developing countries. So that is why at the end, you cannot have a consistent index if you use this kind of indices. I will try to go very quickly. Sorry. This is just an example of at FERDI we have built an index that we call physical vulnerability to climate change. It is a structure of sectoral indicators. So the intentions of this and this is twofold. The first one is to try to identify the most vulnerable countries in the world, in particular in the developing world. As I told you at the beginning of my intervention, all countries are vulnerable to climate change, but not at the same level. So we need to distinguish the most vulnerable from those that are least vulnerable. So it is an index that is devoted to be used to allocate resources towards the most vulnerable countries. The components are purely physical, exogenous. We have no components that can provocate or that can be at the basis of the self-inflicted policies for countries. So that is very important. And also for the aggregations of the components, we know for those people who have used the composite index, it's very important to not dilute in the final index the specific component of this. So we need at the end in the composite index to reflect the specific vulnerability of each country. So for that, we need to find a methodology, a functional criteria, mathematical criteria that can help us to have at the end in the indicator the specificity of each country. Sorry. So you have also the rating system that is very important to get. So I don't want to dwell a lot on these technical aspects, but if people want to know more about these indices, they can visit the website of FERDI, and currently my colleague and I, we are producing a good visualization of this indicator. So don't hesitate to visit the website. And just to finish, this is just the structure of the index, and we have go further with colleagues and try to build the disaggregated component of the index. That's help not to have an index in the country level, but also have some index in the infranational level. So a country can allocate resources between their own territories. So that is very important. So if you have maybe questions, I'm available to answer. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks indeed, Sosso. Switch off that mic. Switch the microphone that we are using. Okay, thanks indeed, because as you know, we started thinking and working on great criteria that should be separable for other sub-criteria, criteria that should not be, let's say, not exclusively present related, and also show it to us now we are moving on, and thanks to for your contribution, we are moving on and still enlarging our point of view and our picture by hosting a point of view coming from another very important part of the so-called global south. And in that sense, I'm really happy to welcome the colleague Indira Basu, which is coming from the other co-partner of this this initiative, the India's Youth Climate Network. India is linked solving the problems with all the please, Indira, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here in some way.
Thank you so much.
It was too optimistic.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay.
Okay.
Just let me know.
If,
thank you so much. All right. So as my esteemed colleagues have already spoken at length, I'd just like to add on that, you know, in recent analysis of the shortfall in the promised 100 billion, the analysis found that the US fell short by, you know, the most. In fact, in 2020, the US should have provided 43.48 billion towards the goal, commensurate with its gross national income, and cumulative territorial emissions since 1990 and its population size. But according to the analysis, the US provided just 5% of this amount. The other laggards in this case happen to be Australia, Canada, and, you know, some other countries. Now, the debate has always been about, okay, major polluters also being countries from the developing world, for example, India and China. But one can't expect reparations to be equal from the developing part of the world and the developed parts, for example, the US, because unfortunately, the conditions that exist in the developing world are very different from those in the United States, for example, or even in many parts of Europe. And the conditions of poverty and years and decades of, you know, lagging behind obviously have enabled circumstances that have allowed us to remain as major polluters. Now, the other thing that I wanted to focus on before I move on, before I add to this, is that it's been in the interest of developing nations to keep the definition of climate finance ambiguous, because that's helped maintain the status quo, where a majority of loans can then pass off as climate finance. Developing countries, including my home country, that is India, said that climate finance should be based on the principles of equity and common, but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, which essentially means that richer countries who have emitted without constraint in the past should provide finance to emerging economies that are still developing. You see, climate change is not a future event. It's happening right now. And as is evident, the developing world is bearing the brunt of it. If you look at the recent floods in Pakistan, for example, which have caused billions in damage and, you know, much loss to cattle, to poultry, to houses, to people's lives. I mean, it's devastating. Closer home where I live, which is in India, year on year, one sees landslides, one sees floods in the northeast parts of the country. And it's not that easy for simply, or internal government systems to help, because there is so much to be done within our own, within our own ecosystem and economy that's lagging behind already. We need money for education. We need to feed our people. There is widespread malnutrition even in 2022. So when these climate disasters take place in countries such as ours, or in many other in African nations, for example, then there is that much more damage, and there simply isn't enough funds to kind of make reparations then for these. So when foreign aid comes in, we're always grateful, but foreign aid in just those instances nearly isn't enough, because then we're simply trying to put a band-aid on cancer, essentially. What we have to try and do is to adapt our ecosystems and facilitate climate finance flows in a sustainable, concessional, and long-term fashion, and that which is also climate-specific, because one can't have a blanket agenda for climate finance and say, okay, we're just going to do this for XYZ countries, because every region, and in fact, countries like ours, like India, which have very different climatic conditions in different parts of the country, require very different kinds of interventions. And that has to be kept in mind when allocating climate finance. The 100 billion promise remains elusive, and developed countries will have to contribute at a far greater capacity to meet the Paris Agreement's target of extending the 100 billion per year goal to 2025. 2025 is almost here, and it continues to elude us, the reparations that developed countries have promised. In fact, even if we look at the developed part of the world, for example, the United Kingdom and parts of Europe, they're staring at a very, very cruel winter this time because of the energy bills, the global economy being in recession, and the compounding effects of climate change. And where do we stand today, where even the developed world is faltering, and there is so much instability in every sense of the word? For the NDCs, that is the nationally determined contributions targets, to be met, especially in the developing world, we require urgent interventions that are not just financial, but also technological, and we need capacity building support from developed countries. While the mobilization of resources must be led by developed countries and should be, concessional, what is very important to focus on in this particular regard is that there should be equitable allocation between adaptation and mitigation projects. The focus largely for years and decades has been on private finance in sustaining climate finance goals, but that isn't going to be enough for the climate change the climate transition for the developing world. And developed countries must use their instruments and their institutions in more robust and more sustainable ways to keep up the climate finance flows to the developing part of the world. And as I was saying earlier, that when we look at the worst polluters, of course, it's not just the developed parts of the world, but also many developing nations. But we first have to eliminate the conditions in the developing world, like India, China, Pakistan, etc., that have led to us having an unsustainable ecosystem in the first place. For example, even in the urban parts of India today, one sees underprivileged people who are poverty-stricken burning rubber tires, in the winter for heating. And that causes, much air pollution. If we look at, the farmers in northern India who have to burn their crops at a particular time of the year, and then there's terrible air pollution that is caused in northern India and in cities like Delhi, which is India's national capital. We can't simply put the blame on the emitters or on particular communities which are polluting. We have to look at why they are polluting in the first place, and we have to provide sustainable means for them to lead better lives. Because after all, the pollution that is caused is not just impacting neighbors. It's not that you're shifting the garbage to your neighbor and therefore you're done with the problem. Those who are causing pollution are also suffering, in fact, sometimes even more. And I'm only talking about the parts of the world here. I'm not talking about the developed nations here. So the reparations that have to be made by polluters cannot be equal where the developing world and the developed parts of the world are concerned. I rest my case, and I'd like to give the floor to the other speakers now, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks indeed. Thanks indeed, Indira. And you touched upon another point that was still lacking in our picture. So the point of view, not just, well, we started by seeing how things are going from a comprehensive state of the art. Then we increased our picture by posting an internal point of view. We simplified this by addressing some criteria. Now it's time for addressing another issue, starting from your point of view, addressing this point. So the concrete participation from people, from the local point of view, for the recipients. So giving voice to who is going to, let's say, distract this opportunity, if we can mention all speaking in those terms, and also by looking at the present generation, but also the young, and then hopefully the future generation. And I do know that this will be also the topic that our colleagues, meaning another member of the young people coming from India, meaning Dr. Srishti Singh, coming from climate change professional COI 17 country contact economy, India is going to work with them. So Srishti, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me as part of this panel today. And I'm representing the Indian Youth Climate Network, and I'm going to bring a totally different perspective to this table, I'm sure, and I'm so happy to do that as well. So I am really talking about how youth could be part of the solution when we are talking about solving the climate crisis, and how finance finance plays a very important role in that. So I'll just break down our own topic, which is climate justice finance. And when it comes to climate justice, we really need to, we don't really need to, but we have to keep the intergenerational justice also at the center of it. So while we have 56.3% population, which is young people in the world, there are very less people who are kind of participating in the policy discussions. And policy discussions really matter a lot when it comes to large-scale impact of finding those solutions and having those approaches in place so that solutions which are designed are actually implemented. So that was my bit on the climate justice. But when we talk about from global perspectives to local solutions, when we see local actions, we generally find these youth, which comprise, which I just told you that comprises about 60% of the world population. They are at the forefronts of getting impacted by this climate crisis. But not only when they are having this risk being, they are seeing these risks in the community, they are also at the forefront of devising those local solutions. Whenever you see a rescue operation, or whenever you see rehabilitation work happening, or whenever you're saying the community is being rebuilt, you will always find young volunteers at the forefront to kind of bring those solutions. But not only that, in terms of the volunteers, I have seen in my country during the COVID relief situations, there were a lot of youth networks who mobilized freelance so that they could come, so that the communities could get the right facilities, get that medicinal support, some in-kind support as well, just through their networks to get them into the right hospital. So that kind of collaborations also they were able to mobilize during that kind of crisis which we were all facing just 2 years back. So while they are part of that local solution, when it comes to global perspectives and policy solutions, they are not really they are very very underrepresented. While the UNFCCC has in many talks and agreements has said that youth participation is crucial and they need to be part of designing the global policy processes and all that. Youth, I mean, we all know that in the decision making, when it comes to decision making, the participation of youth is very, very limited. And I feel particularly that the people who are working at the grassroots level or who are part of the local solutions and actions, they have a better sense of how that planning could happen, how the policies could be designed, and we really need to work on that knowledge and translate that grassroots experience and local knowledge into the policy level, and I'm sure it would have better and effective implementation of those policies. So when we talk about the UNFCCC, the Action for Climate Empowerment work stream, which I have been following for the past 3 years, is very, very vital, and it's at the center of how youth can participate in the decision making through its 6 different elements, which does not only cover formal education, it also covers training, public awareness, access to information, and all that. So we need to, since we are in the policy space, we need to see how the ACE work stream at UNFCCC could be strengthened, and we have just on the verge of adopting the ACE action plan this year for the coming 4 years. The finance bit of it is very, very less. It just says, the policy does say about mobilizing finance, and it does not really give those financial instruments so that ACE or the Action for Climate Empowerment could be strengthened, and it invest more into youth inclusion at different levels. So I don't know how we can as a community strengthen that, but we need to look that ACE is not an outcome, but it is a process that leads to mitigation or adaptation. Even for as my previous colleague mentioned about adaptation finance, a lot of it when we talk about adaptation projects, the first step is always climate education. We try to educate, we try to communicate concepts of climate change to the community and why do we need to take certain actions. So that's what I wanted to talk about when it comes to global perspectives. But a very, very vital part in between the two perspectives, global and local, is also about how nationally our governments are, involving youth in those planning processes. I just did a few, research projects on adaptation, and also I wrote a blog on how youth participation is very limited. I found only 2.3%, national parliaments have youth representatives, which is very, very less. So, and I tried to find as well that why is this happening at the national level. And I was very curious to consult with some of the people from Youngo and some of the other people who have been in the climate policy space, also at working at the national level. And very interestingly, I got to know, and there is a research too, which says that many of the young people are not even invited in at the national level for policy discussions. And then I thought, why they are not invited? Why, whether they are not part of the network or whether they are not. I mean, what is the perception behind that? And interestingly, there is a perspective which lies, at least I can say it for my country, that they don't feel that youth are technically sound to, participate in those kind of discussions. So, and again, I would actually give, with that challenge as well, I like to give it to the authorities and say that we should build those capacities so that youth can participate in those discussions. So it is a very two-way process. The authorities also need to learn that they have to give that space, and youth also need that capacity so that they can be part of that space. So Yeah, so I think whenever I have been working in this zone, where when I have been working in how youth can participate in different policies, then I always look at it from a holistic perspective. So at local level, we need more investments in climate education. At the global level, we need a lot of capacity building so that youth can participate in these very technical, comprehensive policy processes. And at the national level, I think we need a lot of stakeholders to come together and understand why youth is required in developing those policies and how they can very much contribute to implement those policies effectively. So yeah, those are points I wanted to make, and thank you.
Thanks indeed, Srishti, also for having, let's say, touched upon another point here. So participation is important, but also participation of young generations, and you addressed another point that actually starting from COP26 became more central. So very important global pledge for education. On the right road of that, plus on the left side road about other pledges, we might say, if you are not, this is not the critical, not just looking at the positive side of the corner, but also on what is not yet so at the center, really at the center of the picture, like the leading place for phasing down, phasing out. This was the mantra, one of the mantra of the last COP, phasing out, phasing down from carbon emissions and carbon usage. But you addressed also another point, a problem of participation, a problem of representation of actors, and we have to say that perhaps young generation might be responsible for the future, but there are still actors that are responsible for the past, for what happened, and for what is still happening. And this is the matter of the topic of our next talk, next intervention. I'm referring to the intervention that the colleague, Professor Marco Grasso, which is online, as you can see on the screen, is going to offer to us. Marco Grasso from the Università degli Studi di Milano-Bicocca, the University of Milano-Bicocca, Italy. Marco, thanks for being here, and the floor goes to you then.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the connection is bad and it's getting worse. But I don't know if it's my side or your side. But either way, can you? I uploaded. I share some slides. You can look at that. You can see that.
Yes, I think we asking people in charge for that, for sharing the slide that Professor Grasso is going to like to.
So.
Just a second, Marco. We are facing this point. In the meantime, if you would like to introduce your topic.
I mean, my point is much more practical than the point made before. I'm actually speaking about what in the jargon of the convention would be loss and damages, but I prefer to refer to it as compensation or even financial rectification for some wrongdoing. Basically, the argument there in Sharm, where you are now, is among states, right? There are rich states we should support and provide compensation to more impacted, weaker countries, by and large in the south of the world. I'm arguing here that there are other agents or subjects, if you want, that are very much responsible for climate change, and who should bear part of the cost of the damage caused by climate impacts. It's not only states or affected individuals. In my opinion, it is also companies, and especially among companies, those companies which contributed the most and profited the most from climate harm. And I'm referring, of course, as I said before, to oil and gas company. To be clear, I'm speaking of sort of additional money to the one under the UNFCCC architecture. So the money which oil and gas company should provide in general to the most vulnerable community would be additional to climate finance already dealt with under the convention. I'm arguing that oil and gas companies have a major role in climate change because they contributed to the escalation of climate damages by providing gigatons of carbon fuels the global economy while ignoring, so to speak, climate harm. So there's a sort of moral responsibility from these companies, which additionally also contributed greatly in misleading the public in understanding the issue at stake here in climate change. I'm referring to the sophisticated and enormously well-funded campaign of climate denial that started in the US roughly 30 years ago. And all these facts are morally relevant and attributes sort of moral responsibility for climate damages to oil and gas companies. A straightforward way to abide by their moral responsibility for oil and gas companies is through payment of compensation or reparations to wronged parties. And in particular, to do so, it would be necessary that these companies relinquish part of their tainted wealth to provide affected subjects with financial means for coping with climate damages, which, by the way, is also consistent with most of the demands coming from the climate justice movement that companies, and particularly oil and gas companies, repay their impact debt. There are different ways to calculating these reparations. One way is the one I'm presenting briefly here, and it is based on the social cost of carbon. Another way, which I'm working on now, is to allocate the estimated damages. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Can
Those
you
of
hear
us
me?
on the call can hear you. I think
Okay.
it might have disconnected from the.
You are
the room.
disconnected. So the problem is on their side, right?
I think it's on their side. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pity because yeah, I can hear you perfectly, but a big problem with the Sherman Shack actually. So what are we doing now? We are waiting actually. So you're back.
Yes, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear?
Okay, good. So what I was saying is that there are different ways for calculating this reparation. I'm presenting briefly here a way based on the social cost of carbon. I'm working on another way based on the allocation of the estimated climate damage for the futures. By the way, last week there in Sharm el-Sheikh, I don't remember which NGO presented a report calculating on the with data methodology the reparation by, I guess, 5 or 6 major international oil companies. Anyway, taking as a reference 90 euros per ton climate reparations, which is currently a credible estimate of the social cost of carbon, would produce enormous sum, much greater than the oil and gas companies' total license. So we actually operated some assumption through which it is possible to distinguish these top 20 companies in different groups high requirement, medium requirement, and low requirement. As you see, based on the essence, their contribution to denialism, their profits and revenues, and so forth. So to cut a long story short, these are the you see here in the third column the initial money that major oil and gas companies should put on the table for their reparation. This is part of their morally relevant share. It amounts to like 33 billion per initial contribution for BP and so forth. You see, for instance, Saudi Aramco would have a 97.4 million ramped up to almost 2,000 billion at the end of the period considered. It's a huge sum, I reckon, but it's not much. It should be put in relation with their profits, which are huge and have been especially huge in this last year. So, for instance, in 2022, even more than in 2021, but already in 2021, you see the annual profits of the major oil and gas company. For instance, Saudi Aramco made more than 100 billion profit, or ExxonMobil 33 billion profit, and so forth. So it's not, they can afford, so to speak, such amount of reparation. Finally, some implication of this perspective, to me, it's quite evident that shifting the perspective from only states to oil and gas companies could also make it possible to change the role of these companies in global climate policy and global climate negotiation, changing them from the villains to the agents of change. A focus on their reparation can produce new possibility for them to become part of the solution, as they like to say, rather than passive and profitable bystanders to continuous climate disruption. It could also rejuvenate the current climate system, which is a bit blocked, ossified into this opposition between the richer part of the world, which doesn't want to acknowledge any proper responsibility, and so still refuses the issue of loss and damages. As I seem to have to remember that President Biden did last Friday there in Sharm. And it could also sort of change these traditional geopolitical groupings, a north versus a south, developed versus developing countries, and so forth. And as I said at the outset, it could and should complement the so far inadequate institutional structure, the pledges under the Green Climate Fund, which are not yet there. This loss and damages mechanism, which seems to go basically nowhere. So I think that it is a very promising way of raising additional funding, which could also have some further positive side effects. And the main message here to conclude is that we should go a bit beyond this state-centric architecture of climate negotiation if we want to act with the required urgency on the climate crisis. Thank you very much, and I hope that you could somehow hear me. Thank you.
Thanks indeed, Marco. Also, thanks also for your participation, even in virtual form, due to specific reasons. we are now moving to the last intervention, but let me just stress a couple of points that Professor Grasso already raised. Will be also the center of the picture that Mr. Baatz is going to propose to us. First, unjust imposition of crime at risk should be managed, should be addressed, and be distributed. And adaptation finance has not to do just and only with the representatives of countries, but has to be devoted and dedicated and focused also to the vulnerable people, also by involving those people in the decision-making processes. And this is in line with what Srishti already presented, meaning a largest participation from civil society. And last but not least, the take-home message that Marco gave to us. Oil and gas companies were surely part of the problem, plus they are current the risk or are leaving the opportunity to become part of the solution. And this will be also hopefully at the center of the intervention that the last speaker for today is going to address. So Christian Baatz, Christian is a professor by the Kiel University. Christian, the floor is yours. Thanks for giving me
a yeah, thank you. You can hear me well, I guess. Okay. Can you switch off the mic? Okay. Yeah, apologies to those online. I think you can't see the slide anyway. So I also think we are running out of time, but nevertheless. Yeah, okay, it's outside. Yeah, okay. I just. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's better. Okay. Yeah, let me try to be as quick as I can. So, as we heard, adaptation finance in particular is very scarce, and distributing the scarce good in a fair way is very difficult, giving competing needs, but also entitlements. So let me start with a couple of remarks on on the ownership of adaptation finance, then look into how this is reflected in the Green Climate Fund and also the adaptation funds distribution criteria, and then also critically discuss a couple of other criteria of these funds. So a quick recap. So as we heard, and I think here in the room all agree on, risk and harm imposition on vulnerable people is deeply unjust. So these people are entitled to compensation, broadly understood, although for a well-known reason that word is not used in the negotiations. And kind of Marco already touched upon that. Compensation is to be provided by polluters and able agents, so in relation to emissions and overall wealth. So here I endorse a hybrid burden sharing account that combines polluter pays and ability to pay principle in a particular way. So funding should come from these agents. What I would like to stress is, sorry, a bit too quick here, that this does not just hold for countries, but also for organizations and individuals. And these have, at minimum, they have a moral obligation to provide a remedy to vulnerable people. And now here comes it, I think, or this obligation exists vis-a-vis the individuals who are vulnerable to climate change, because, well, obviously these are the ones that are threatened and suffering from climate change. Obviously, we also talk about vulnerable countries, vulnerable cultures, but this is because the people that make up the culture of country are vulnerable to climate change. And finance is one way to discharge one's obligation to provide compensation. So to sum up that point, adaptation finance is owed to those individuals whose rights are threatened by climate change, and once it has been provided it is also owned by these people. So with these kind of more theoretical reflections, let us take one step further. So adaptation that effectively protects people must be undertaken at the collective level. Of course, individuals can and do also adapt, but we also need to adapt the structures. And that does require some form of collective decision-making. So how do you want to adapt? Who should be protected by that adaptation? And which kinds of benefits do we seek? So, and if individuals ultimately own adaptation finance, they are, generally speaking, entitled to have a say in these decision-making processes. And so they're entitled to some influence on the adaptation projects and goals. Of course, many decisions must be made by representatives. They cannot necessarily involve all the people affected on the ground, but in that case, it's important that there are real opportunities for political participation in selecting the representatives that make the choices and also in influencing the work of these representatives. And in addition to this entitlement perspective, there are also instrumental reasons for demanding political participation of the individuals that are supposed to benefit by adaptation. So we know for quite some time that there's more and more literature coming up on this, that the incorporation of local knowledge, of support by local actors and community engagement is a prerequisite of successful adaptation. We already kind of heard the demand here to also give funding, more funding to the local level. I'm not sure if you agree, but in my view, that's kind of in line with that demand. So adaptation finance that honors the rights of the owners of this finance requires collective will formation and decision making, which local individuals have a proper say, and also the absence of barriers to reasonable decision making, for example, widespread corruption, clientelism, and so on. So in a way, you can demand some kind of local democratic processes. So the here is that, among many other things, most importantly vulnerability, of course, the distribution of adaptation finance should also honor criteria around meaningful political participation. And how is that reflected in the adaptation green climate? That issue does occur, but in my view, insufficiently so, and they also have all kinds of other criteria, which I think is not helpful to prioritize adaptation finance fairly. So GCF says the project proposals should outline how they are developed in consultation with relevant stakeholders, and the adaptation fund also refers to this consultative processes. However, consultation is different from and weaker than real opportunities for political participation in local democratic processes. So because to give kind of to give people to say speak the word or give their opinion and their ideas and their concerns in consultations does not necessarily mean that they can in any way shape or influence the actual adaptation decisions that are made. So it's different from the opportunity for political participation or democratic processes. And also, there is no criterion in the GCF or AF that explicitly addresses the governance context in which the adaptation decisions are made. So while I said I think that this aspect of political participation and governance context is underemphasized, I think other aspects are overemphasized. And I think I run through these quickly. So the GCF, among others, says that proposals should refer to the number of direct and indirect beneficiaries, and the adaptation funds explicitly said, well, the project should be cost effective. And the idea here is possibly to prioritize projects that are more efficient. So projects that deliver a greater adaptation benefit for a number of given resources. However, adaptation benefits are very diverse. They are referred to very partially incommensurable goods, so it's are very difficult to measure and also compare adaptation benefits. So, and kind of the indicator of the number of benefits is not really a good efficiency indicator, because of course we can imagine many projects where the number of beneficiaries is small, but the benefit is actually huge, whereas kind of we don't care that much about trivial benefits to a larger number of people. And up to date, there are really no, I think, very good proposals how to measure this idea about efficiency. But still, GCF and AF kind of, they demand that, and colleagues of mine who closely monitor the work or research the work of the GCF, they tell me that many adaptation projects are not approved because these projects struggle to demonstrate that they are efficient or that they are cost effective. But kind of, if we are not actually clear what efficiency means in the adaptation context, it's quite a problem that this is the reason why these projects are not approved. So yeah, we need to find better indicator or discard that. Very quickly, final points. It's also demanding that the alternative, there should be, or absence of alternative sources of financing. If we take seriously the idea that this is compensation, why should that be? I don't think this is a very good criterion. If a country, again, kind of Burkina Faso, has some resources available that could invest into an adaptation project, I think it's very reasonable and justified that they spend that money on a development project, for example, and use the international funding for this. So I'm not convinced that in this context this is a good criterion. And they also have other criteria which are rather about what is nice to have rather than being kind of necessary sufficient conditions for effective adaptation. So I think I should come to an end. My nutshell here, or the wrap up, is that kind of the criteria of both the GCF and the AF are not yet fit to guide the distribution of scarce adaptation funds in meaningful ways, or to put it more positively, I think there's room for improvement. And in fact, it just together with partners from France, the Seychelles, around Germany and Sweden, we investigate kind of what better procedures and also criteria could be to improve the just distribution of adaptation finance. And so we're also very much to learn more about the indicator that FERDI is developing. We will have a close look at that. Thanks for your attention despite the noise and yeah, the overshoot. Thank you.
Thanks indeed, Chris, and also for having completed our, let's say, intellectual journey on the topic. And the last take-home message that one of the last take-home messages that Chris gave to us is how to compare adaptation measures and benefits. This is for sure an open issue, for sure an issue that deserves more attention. And let's hope, and now we have to unfortunately conclude our meeting. Let's hope that again, starting from the cooperation that we inaugurated with FERDI and also with the Indian Young Climate, the MECRA and the other institutions here represented together with the colleagues. Let's hope that they will have other plans and opportunities to go more in depth. Thanks again for your attention, thanks for your participation, and thanks for being here. Looking forward for our climate more feasible and more just in the future. Again, thank you.